Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let's talk about value, not the price of a product, but the value of a person. There will be moments in your life when someone you care about will ignore you. They may underestimate your presence, dismiss your kindness, or act like your silence is emptiness. But today, I want to teach you something powerful. Your silence is not empty. It's full of meaning. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to chase to be seen. And you don't need to fight to prove your worth. Because those who ignore your voice do not deserve your words. Instead of asking, "Why is he ignoring me?" ask, "Why am I giving someone so much power over my peace?" The strongest lesson you can teach someone is that you are not dependent on their attention to feel valuable. And how do you do that? You stay kind, you stay focused, you keep growing. When someone treats you like you're invisible, you don't dim your light. You shine even brighter, but in your own space. Let them feel the loss of your presence, not by punishing them, but by flourishing without them. Don't become bitter, become better. Don't talk about your worth, leave it, because true strength doesn't scream, it stands tall in silence. And in time, those who once ignored you will wonder how they ever did. Be kind to everyone, not because they are kind to you, but because you are kind. Let them see the difference. Let them feel the shift. And let your silence echo louder than their neglect ever could. Understanding self-worth is one of the most important steps in building emotional intelligence and developing healthy relationships. When we say that self-worth is non-negotiable, we're making a clear and powerful statement. Your value as a person does not, and should not depend on how others treat you. It is rooted within you, not outside of you. In a world where attention often seems like a measure of love or importance, it's easy to fall into the trap of equating being noticed with being valued. But real confidence and emotional strength begin the moment you realize that you are inherently worthy, whether someone acknowledges it or not. When someone ignores you, whether it's in a romantic relationship, a friendship, or even a professional environment, the natural instinct may be to seek answers, to win back their attention, or to change something about yourself to fit what you believe they want. This reaction is deeply human, but it's also a reflection of a misunderstood sense of self-worth. Instead of asking what you did wrong, it's important to take a step back and ask why their opinion matters so much. If someone's silence or lack of appreciation causes you to question your value, that is a sign to re-center and reflect on your own beliefs about yourself. From a psychological perspective, people with high self-worth maintain a steady sense of self even in the face of rejection, disinterest, or neglect. They understand that not everyone will recognize their strengths or value their presence, and that's okay. Self-worth is not about being praised by everyone. It's about being grounded enough in your identity that you do not crumble when someone fails to validate you. This becomes especially important in relationships where emotions can blur the line between personal validation and connection. If someone you care about begins to ignore you or withdraws emotionally, the emotional discomfort you feel is real, but it should not lead you to question your value. You might feel hurt, disappointed, or even angry, but the key is to remind yourself that someone else's lack of attention does not define who you are. Your worth is not conditional. It is not dependent on text replies, returned phone calls, or affectionate words. These things feel good, and they do matter in healthy relationships, but they are not what make you valuable. Building this mindset requires practice. One essential practice is self-affirmation, reminding yourself daily of your strengths, your principles, your talents, and your character. Reflect on what you bring to relationships and the qualities that make you a good friend, partner, or colleague. Write these things down if necessary. Make them real, because when you know what you bring to the table, you stop trying to convince others of your worth. You stop negotiating with yourself and trying to be enough for someone who chooses not to see your value. Another key practice is learning to set emotional boundaries. This doesn't mean becoming cold or distant, but it does mean being emotionally self-aware enough to know when to stop pouring energy into someone who consistently overlooks you. If someone repeatedly ignores your presence or efforts, they're showing you what they're capable of offering. It is not your job to fix them or to beg for recognition. When your self worth is intact, you can make space for people who appreciate you and release those who don't without bitterness or resentment. It is also crucial to separate ego from self-worth. Sometimes, when someone ignores us, it hurts not because we love them deeply, but because our ego is wounded. We think, how dare they not see me? Or why would they ignore someone like me? That is ego talking. True self-worth does not need to prove anything. It does not react to being ignored with desperation or arrogance. Instead, it remains calm, centered, and quietly strong. It says, whether you see me or not, I see myself, and that's what matters most. This mindset shift doesn't happen overnight, especially if you've been conditioned to seek validation or to associate love with attention. It will take time and intentional effort to break free from those habits. But once you begin to cultivate real self-worth, everything changes. You become more selective about who you allow in your life. You begin to prioritize peace over approval. You realize that being alone is far better than being around people who diminish your sense of self. Ironically, when you truly embrace your worth and stop chasing validation, you often become more magnetic. People are drawn to confidence that doesn't beg for attention. Your presence becomes a quiet reminder that value is not proven by performance, it is embodied. When someone ignores you and you respond not with reaction, but with dignity and grace, you teach them something powerful without saying a word. This is not about pretending you don't care or hiding your feelings. It's about choosing yourself with clarity and self-respect. It's about saying, I'm worthy even if you don't see it, and I will not diminish that worth trying to earn your attention. In conclusion, self-worth is a fundamental part of emotional well-being, and it is not something you earn from others. It's something you claim for yourself. The more you understand and honor your worth, the less power you give to those who fail to do the same. And in doing so, you become emotionally freer, stronger, and more resilient than ever before. In a world that constantly demands responses, reactions, and explanations, silence is often misunderstood. Many associate silence with weakness, defeat, or avoidance. But when applied with intention and wisdom, silence is one of the most powerful forms of communication. It is not a lack of strength, but rather a demonstration of inner discipline. There are times when silence conveys more authority, clarity, and dignity than words ever could. In relationships especially, whether romantic, personal, or professional, when someone chooses to ignore you, the urge to defend yourself, to explain, to be heard, is strong. But learning when to step back and let silence speak can teach both you and the other person far more than any argument or emotional outburst. Silence is not passive, it is an active, conscious choice. When you choose to remain silent instead of reacting emotionally to someone who ignores you, you are not surrendering, you are showing control over your own energy. You are saying, without speaking, I do not chase those who overlook me. That message is loud and clear. Silence can express disappointment, self-respect, boundaries, and even strength, all without a single word. Sometimes the reason people fail to see your worth is because you've made yourself too available, too ready to explain yourself. But the moment you stop responding to disrespect or disinterest with explanations and instead respond with silence, you shift the dynamic. You stop playing by their rules and start setting your own. From a psychological and emotional perspective, silence gives space for reflection, for both you and the other person. When you withdraw your energy and words, the other person is left to sit with their own behavior. If they care, they'll notice the absence. If they don't, your silence helps you clearly see where you stand without confusion. It's a filtering mechanism, but more importantly, it helps you reconnect with yourself. When you stop focusing on what you want them to understand and start listening to your own emotions in the silence, you gain clarity. You no longer need their words to validate your worth because your silence affirms it for you. Silence is also a form of emotional maturity. Immature reactions are loud, impulsive, and often fueled by hurt. When you act from emotion, especially pain, you often say things you don't mean, or you beg for attention that you later regret. But mature silence is different. It is not meant to punish or manipulate. It's meant to protect. It shields your peace, your self-respect, and your emotional balance. It says, I value myself enough not to engage in a dynamic where I am not respected or valued. Many people fear silence because they associate it with abandonment or rejection. But when you learn to use silence intentionally, not out of fear, but out of self-respect, it becomes a tool for self-preservation. You begin to understand that you don't owe everyone access to your thoughts or your time. You begin to realize that your presence is a privilege, and if someone treats it like a burden or an afterthought, then your absence becomes a boundary they cannot ignore. This is especially true in situations where words have failed. If you've expressed your feelings clearly and have been dismissed or ignored, repeating yourself rarely changes the outcome. At some point, silence becomes the most respectful and powerful next step. It communicates that you've said what you needed to say, and now you will no longer participate in a conversation where your voice is not valued. Additionally, silence is a form of emotional detox. It removes the need to win an argument or prove a point. It allows the emotional noise to settle, and in that stillness, the truth becomes clearer. Often, people begin to reflect on your value not when you're talking, but when you've gone quiet, when you stop showing up the way you used to, texting first, always initiating, always explaining. They notice. Your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects their behavior back at them and forces them to acknowledge the space you once filled. And in that space, they learn, sometimes for the first time, what your presence really meant. However, silence must be used wisely. It's not about emotional withdrawal or manipulation. It's not about punishing someone by ghosting them or cutting them off without communication. Silence should follow sincere effort. If you've tried to speak and your words were disregarded or met with indifference, then silence becomes your next and final statement. It's not the beginning of a game, it's the end of a chase. It's not about teaching someone a lesson in cruelty. It's about teaching them the price of taking you for granted. When you learn to master silence, you begin to gain a new kind of power, the kind that doesn't need applause, attention, or validation. You understand that peace is more valuable than being right, that dignity is more important than temporary attention, and that not every action deserves your reaction. You become calmer, wiser, and stronger. You walk away from what no longer serves you, not with loud drama, but with quiet resolve. People begin to recognize the value of your words because they now understand the weight of your silence. Ultimately, silence teaches you as much as it teaches the other person. It teaches you that you can be strong without being aggressive, that you can be kind without being naive, and that you can love deeply while still protecting your heart. You don't have to raise your voice to raise your value. You only need to stop lowering yourself for those who refuse to listen. Silence is not weakness, it is a choice, it is wisdom, and sometimes it is the only voice you need. One of the most powerful truths you can embrace in life is that your growth, peace, and dignity are not determined by how you react to others, but by the actions you choose for yourself. When people ignore you, dismiss you, or attempt to provoke a reaction, your first instinct might be to defend your worth through words, confrontation, or emotional expression. That's a natural response after all. We're wired to seek connection and clarity. But true growth and self-mastery come when you shift from reactive behavior to intentional action. Instead of spending your energy trying to make someone realize your value, you use that energy to invest in your own elevation. You become better, not bitter. You focus on building rather than begging. This is where real power begins. Reaction is often emotional, immediate, and short-term. It can feel satisfying in the moment, especially when someone's behavior has hurt you or challenged your sense of self. But reactions rarely bring peace or progress. In fact, they often leave you feeling drained, misunderstood, or even regretful. On the other hand, action, especially conscious, purposeful action, is rooted in clarity. It is guided by self-respect, not by impulse. When someone ignores you, you don't need to scream, prove, or perform. You need to rise. You need to make choices that support your peace, reflect your dignity, and position you for growth. For example, if a person in your life chooses to act like you don't matter, your reaction might be to argue, chase, or question them. But none of that will restore your value in their eyes, because your worth was never truly lost. It was simply unrecognized. Rather than reacting emotionally, you act with intent. You redirect your energy into the areas of your life that make you stronger. Your work, your passions, your health, your relationships with people who do see your worth. You stop giving your power away to someone who treats your presence as optional. Your silence becomes powerful. Your focus becomes unstoppable. There is nothing more unexpected and more effective than responding to disrespect not with anger, but with elevation. When someone expects you to break down, and instead you build yourself up, you take back control of the situation. You send a clear, unspoken message. You are not in charge of my peace. I am. And while your reaction might have given them temporary satisfaction or drama, your action leaves them with reflection and often regret. They see that you do not need them to thrive. You are not waiting for their validation. You are growing without them, and that growth is undeniable. This approach also reaffirms your internal standards. When you choose to elevate rather than react, you're saying, I do not lower myself to fit into someone else's chaos. You're building emotional discipline, the kind that says, I don't respond just because I'm provoked. I respond only when it aligns with who I want to become. That's maturity, that's power, and that's the kind of strength that commands respect even in silence. Choosing action over reaction also keeps your focus on what matters most, your future, not their behavior. Reaction keeps you stuck in the moment, trying to fix or fight something that you often can't control. But action moves you forward. You start setting new goals, creating new opportunities, nurturing yourself. Worth from within. You begin to understand that healing is not found in revenge or confrontation, but in creation, in becoming a version of yourself so fulfilled, you no longer care who didn't see your value before. You're no longer playing small just to be accepted. You're expanding regardless of who applauds. Letting go of the need to react is also deeply freeing. You don't have to constantly explain yourself, prove yourself, or defend yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding or ignoring you. That freedom gives you room to grow. It gives you clarity, and it allows you to surround yourself with people who don't require convincing. People who recognize your worth simply because they're capable of seeing clearly. In time, you'll realize that the best revenge is not pain for pain. The best revenge is peace. It is happiness. It is building a life so fulfilling and grounded in self, worth that the person who once ignored you becomes irrelevant to your joy. They may notice the difference. They may come back around, curious about how you became so calm, so successful, so centered. But by then, you will have learned that your value never needed their attention. It simply needed your action. So, when you're tempted to respond to someone's silence with emotional chaos, pause, breathe, remember who you are and where you're going. Ask yourself, will this reaction move me forward or keep me stuck? If it keeps you stuck, let it go. Choose yourself, choose growth, choose progress. Not every action has to be loud. Sometimes the most powerful move is quiet, steady, and focused on your own life. And in that quiet, you'll hear your worth echoing louder than any argument could. You are not here to convince anyone of your value. You are here to become the strongest, kindest, most purposeful version of yourself. And you do that by elevating through action, not reaction. In today's fast-paced and often emotionally charged world, kindness is frequently misunderstood. People sometimes associate being kind with being naive, passive, or even weak, especially in situations where someone has hurt or ignored us. But the truth is, kindness is not weakness. In fact, it is one of the greatest strengths a person can possess. It takes emotional maturity, inner stability, and deep self-respect to remain kind in the face of disrespect, rejection, or indifference. When someone ignores you, the natural impulse is to react with bitterness, anger, or withdrawal. But responding with kindness doesn't mean tolerating mistreatment. It means choosing your character over your ego. Being kind to everyone, including those who disregard you, isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's about refusing to let someone else's behavior lower your standards. You choose to remain respectful not because they deserve it, but because you do. Because when you respond to unkindness with kindness, you protect your peace. You show that your behavior is rooted in principle, not in reaction. And over time, this builds a reputation that speaks for you even in your absence. Kindness is often mistaken for submission or lack of boundaries. But true kindness includes clarity, confidence, and self-respect. It doesn't mean saying yes to everyone. It doesn't mean staying silent about mistreatment. It means communicating with grace instead of aggression. It means walking away with dignity rather than slamming doors. It means offering compassion not because you are weak, but because you are strong enough not to mirror someone's negativity. When someone ignores you or tries to make you feel invisible, they are often hoping for a reaction, a loss of composure, a desperate plea for attention, or a cold response. But when you stay grounded and respond with calmness, maturity, and even kindness, you disrupt that expectation. You don't feed their ego or their game. Instead, you rise above it. You show that your emotions are not easily manipulated and that your kindness is not conditional on someone else's behavior. That's powerful. That's influence. This does not mean you have to continue giving your time and energy to someone who disrespects you. Kindness can also look like walking away peacefully. It can look like choosing not to argue. It can mean wishing someone well and choosing not to hold on to resentment. People who are genuinely confident and emotionally strong understand that you don't need to destroy someone to protect yourself. You just need to remove yourself from situations that don't align with your values. There's a quiet confidence in kindness. It says, I can be good to you, even if you're not good to me, because I refuse to let your behavior change who I am. It's not about seeking approval. It's about maintaining integrity. And when you treat people with kindness, even when they expect coldness, you set a standard. You're telling the world, this is how I behave, regardless of how others behave toward me. What makes kindness especially powerful is that it reflects deep emotional intelligence. It shows that you understand people are often unkind because of their own pain, their own confusion, or their own emotional immaturity. Instead of taking things personally, you understand that how someone treats you is often more about them than about you. That awareness allows you to respond from a place of clarity instead of ego, and that's a rare strength. Furthermore, kindness creates a ripple effect. Even if someone doesn't immediately appreciate it, they remember it. They remember the way you didn't retaliate, the way you stayed respectful when you could have been rude, the way you didn't match their silence with hostility. Over time, that kind of behavior earns deep respect. People may not say it, but they feel it, and sometimes that silent respect is more powerful than any loud apology. Kindness also brings you inner peace. When you act out of kindness, you don't have to carry the weight of regret. You don't lie awake at night wondering if you lowered yourself. You don't question whether you betrayed your values. You know you acted from a place of maturity, and that knowledge becomes a source of strength. It allows you to move forward without emotional baggage, without bitterness, and without needing closure from people who may never give it. It's important to note that kindness must come from a full, not empty heart. You cannot pour out kindness to others if you are starving for it yourself. That's why the foundation of true kindness is self-kindness. You take care of yourself, you respect yourself, you set boundaries that protect your energy, and from that strong place of inner care, you are able to extend kindness to others, freely, generously, and without losing yourself in the process. Being kind to everyone is not about pretending that everything is okay. It's about being so secure in who you are that you don't need to tear others down to feel strong. You don't need revenge to feel satisfied. You don't need to prove anything to people who don't see your worth. You know your value, you live it, and in doing so, you let kindness be your quiet strength. In a world that often confuses cruelty with power, choose kindness. In a world that tells you to get even, choose to rise, not for them, but for you, because your kindness says everything about you, and nothing about them, and one day those who ignored your worth will remember your grace more than your silence.